All right. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. Um. Okay. So, picking up where we left off, right? So, previous, of course, we were talking about Burke, right? So, Burke would, we discuss. Burke has, right? So, for Burke, prescriptions are based for him are based with regards to experiences rather than reason, right? In other words, experiences of the past which are gained and accumulated over several generations. And for him, such kinds of experiences are more they are seem to be of great importance than a reason of a single generation or a reason of a single individual or a thinker or a group of individuals. For him, the ideal and the practical, like we discussed previously, are inseparable. Burke's political thought echoes the thoughts of Roman orator and statesman Cicero, right, which we discussed. And like Cicero, even Cicero was he also highlights the essentiality and the necessity of the wisdoms of the ages, right? Wisdoms of the age, and work with the existing material and make the best of what you have, right? Now, reserve for this best in the existing political institutions. And Burke similarly holds parallel views with, and so for him, for Burke, an astute politician or a reformer neglect or disavow the wisdom of the. You must remember that whenever Burke says prejudice, he means it in a positive sense, not in a negative sense. And what I mean by that is this: simply because for Burke, prejudice, right? They prescribe, or for instance, the wisdom of the age, right? Or prejudice, it prescribes the legitimacy of a given rational order in the society, or like it prescribes the prejudice prescribes the ordering of the society that gives the existing system its authority and its legitimacy. In other words, the existing system gains its or derives its authority and legitimacy through this prejudice. By prejudice he means the wisdom of the age. And in order to understand what prejudice means for Burke, in Burkean sense, is this: for Burke, literally, it cannot be concretely or rationally. There's, these prejudice are certain beliefs or habits we have or possess apply in most of our life scenarios. They are there applied, we turn to them, right, to this prejudice will not even exist and we will not even possess them either. They are these prejudices for Burke are they are our ready-made tools or instruments which we apply when we encounter life or when we are made to deal with certain experiences in our life, right? They are the habits and instinctive values passed on from one generation to another by means of traditions and customs. That's why for Burke, this prejudice is the Latin wisdom. It is there. It is right there. It's staying there Latin, right? It is a Latin wisdom which reflects the wisdoms of the previous generation, right? And thus this prejudice outweighs, right, for Burke, it outweighs the wisdom of a single man or a single generation. And we must keep in mind here that prejudice in a Burkean sense is meant to be or is supposed to be taken not in a sense, right? This is why, for instance, if you look, it is interesting to note this, right? You read that's why it's very interesting to understand Jane Austen, right, aptly gave the title of Pride and Prejudice. And if you read Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, you would know exactly what that prejudice in the title means, right? the prejudice, i.e., the traditions are that has been passed on from one generation to another, right? And those prejudices, right, dictates the customs and norms of a given society, right? If you have not just read Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, and so and so for Burke, similar to Cicero and similar to Aristotle, what is practical, right? For him, um, what is practical cannot be gained outside of the past historical and sociocultural context, right? In other words, by for Burke, he simply means this, right? That what is practical cannot be understood, nor can you derive them from the existing historical and sociocultural context. In Burke's own terms or words, he would say manners and habits and customs, right? It is very similar to what Montesquieu in the Persian letter writes, right? The norms, the habits, the values, and the manners, right? It parallels the views of which we have talked about in the previous lecture. You have to, the thing is, what is practical is not as ahistorical or acontextual. What is or what is workable or what is pragmatic depends, what is practical derives its practicality, right? The very virtue of being practical is derived by understanding works, right? Because to its historical with regards to its historical proving of customs and society in which it dwells, we must remember that what is practical in one society may not necessarily be practical in another, right? And this is one of the main mistakes, or this is one of the main errors of modern thinking, especially whenever it comes. In other words, they see practical to be they remove the Burke is saying, and if you actually think about it, Burke is prudent in the sense that yeah, practical is contextual. It is historical. Necessarily work here in India or in the US, right? So he's only when one revealed to naked abstract reason that when becomes a contextual and a and and so like we saw last time that it's what is practical here, right? What works in, for instance, democracy, what works democracy, democracy within the context of Islamic society. For instance, Iran, right? Regardless of what people say of Iran, right? Iran is the only Middle Eastern country or Islamic society in which they have adopted democracy in a they have modified democracy that within the confines of the society and work, right? It has made it work. In fact, you'll find that Iran is quite stable, right? It's quite stable. The society is relatively free, right? Like the Western society, it must become this work. And then we saw in the previous lectures when we Arabs, which the people or the human mind can understand, and from there go on to restructure the whole society. Right? Mistake to think that you can replace and restructure the whole of reality based on work either in the French Revolution or in the Arab Spring, right? Or when a highly idealistic reformer or an idealistic person, right? Whenever he or she mistakenly or erroneously disregard the fact that societies and the varied, diverse institutions and systems that currently exist in that particular society are shaped and formed or out of some historical experience regard such reality. Only a idealistic person, right, with a view about how society ought to be, only such kind of persons will disregard this organic entity that is said to be manipulated by the human mind by bending the society fancy of the abstract concept, right? Whenever we think that, and whenever we do try to impose such abstract principles upon reality, The consequences will no doubt be disastrous, right? Like we find in Arab Spring, or if we have, and like we discussed in the historical context before we delved into this, into the political thoughts of Edmund Burke, was that the consequences were not good, right? The consequences were not good about the French Revolution, right? For instance, for example, an example would be this. No, not French. We use a different example, right? For the sake of variety. For example, you can think about income tax laws, right? Income tax. You see, as in the country, right, wherever you are, no matter which country you live in, you have income tax, right? The government makes sure that okay, you know what, we're going to tax our populations, right? We're going to tax. Why do government tax the citizens? Well, precisely because the money which is collected through tax, the government uses tax money to provide, for the sake of simplicity, right? For the sake of to provide services, right? Social services, be it pension, elderly, or hospitals, or schools, right? Or other welfare benefits. However, then we're going to tax you 20% or 30%. Fairer, in order to make the tax law fairer to all its population. A government, for instance, in India, right? For instance, here in India, the more money you make, the higher the higher percentage of your salary gets deducted, right? It's deducted by the government as an income tax, right? So what happens is that whenever you do make income law, tax law, you find people trying to find a loophole in that income law, right? And then income tax law, and then try to find a loophole and try to escape from paying taxes, right? For instance, in India, there are many rich millionaires and billionaires. They make their own foundations, right? And they do charity work. They do those charity work, and they do have foundations which carries out social work, not because they care, but because by having such by having such social services foundations, they avoid paying tax. For instance, right? For instance, here's a very good example. In America, right? Bill Gates, right, the richest man in the world, right? Bill Gates, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? And that foundation, does charity work, all charity work. What makes him do all this charity work? That generous, right? Is he that kind of a person? The answer is obviously no, right? Bill Gates obviously have this foundation, right? So that he can avoid paying tax to the government, right? That's how it is, right? You may think that, oh, look at these people, right? These billionaires, they're so rich, but then look at them. They're so magnanimous. They're so giving and caring. But in reality, they have these foundations so that they can avoid paying tax to its government. Same thing with Facebook founder Zuckerberg. He has his own foundation, right? Why does he have a foundation? Why? So that he may avoid paying tax, right? It's not because he's a good person, right? I'm a good person. I don't pay tax. I'm just kidding. What I'm saying is they're there so that they may avoid paying tax. Same thing here in India, right? There are many rich families that avoid paying tax to the government by finding a loophole. You see, so same thing. So the government of India may come up with this abstract principle saying that, oh, we have to make it fair for everybody in India to be and then pay their due share. But then in trying to implement it in reality, it's very different. It's very difficult, right? It's very difficult. We have to be, or one must be, change in the society, political change, social change. We must be very, because when we speak of political change or social, we are not talking about some simple matter or issues, right? Simple change in politics, even a single change in society, is not an easy task. We are not we are not talking about some we are not talking about child's play, right? It is not a child's play when we speak of political change, when we speak of social change. We are not talking about we are not talking about some easy, simple issues. We are, in fact, talking about how the world would be changed, right? We are, in fact, talking about changing, right, the whole society, right? We're not just talking about changing the whole society, or just talking. We're not simply talking about changing one bit and pieces of a society, but we are talking about how do we inherently change the social and political relations among people in the society, right? And this will have a real concrete impacts upon the lives of the people, right? We're not just talking about just one minor change here and there, one minor tweak here and there. No, we're talking about how this how any sort of social and political changes will not only change the world, but how such changes, right, will have an impact upon the lives of the people, right? This is because there's always the possibility that not the possibility, but there's always a chance, and the chances are high, right? The chance that a given change, whatever change may be, right, no matter how well intended, no matter how nice the outcomes, which are not which are not only unintended, but which may also worsen the problems that the change is supposed to fix, right? That's what usually happens, right? This is not something that this is some things that we take it for granted, right? We think that if we try to plan out a change, if we try to think of a change, changing a society, and then we think about how do we implement about these changes, we think about it, we think that we plan it out very, very well, right? And then our intentions are good, right? It is well thought out plan schemes, right? Well schemed, and then we try to implement them. But then the consequences is different, right? The results are not what we expected. In fact, sometimes the results are quite opposite to what we intend that it might have been. Moreover, not only is the results different from what we intended, but also our whatever we try to the change which we have implemented sometimes not only brings unintended consequences, but also it worsens the existing problem which the change was supposed to fix. Right? Examples would be the Arab Spring, exactly the Arab Spring. Second would be the election of Donald Trump, right, in 2016, right, 2016. Yeah, you people in America thought, okay, fine, Obama came, now we need a new leader, right? And then we cannot let such a narrow-minded, truncated, right, parochial person such as Donald Trump to be the leader of the free world. But then look at what happened, right? Look at what happened. The consequences, right? Whatever, no matter what people did in order to downplay the seriousness of Trump's candidacy, right, to the office of president of America. No matter what people did in order to downplay and even and literally sideline the importance of Trump, right? No matter what people did, he in the end he came out winning, right? He won the election, right? Same thing. I'm afraid for the next election, here's a prediction, and mark my words. This year, right, there's going to be a presidential election in America, and right now you have Trump, you have the Democratic candidate going against, contesting against President Trump is the former Prime Minister, the former Vice President of America, Joe Biden. And this election, right, this year, Trump will win again, right? Will win again because all those things which people are now fed up of about Trump will not. People may try to in order not to let Trump win again, everything that they do will create an unintended consequences, and those unintended consequences will be one of those consequences will be the re-election of Trump as the president of America again, right? So mark my words, this election Trump will win, right? So that's what it is. So because sometimes whenever you try to implement changes, the results may not be what you in fact hope for. Right? In fact, when any political or social change is pursued in a very naive, in a very immature, in a very haphazard, in a clueless manner, the consequences of such naive endeavors, right, of changing a society may plummet, may cascade out of control, right, plunging the whole society, the nation or the state into conditions that is far worse than before, right? In such scenario, right, tyranny, chaos, violence, and anarchy, and then even the reign of a tyrant are not a far-fetched reality, right? More firmly, a person like, for instance, I want to bring change in society, right? The more firmly I have my eyes set on this abstract ideal, right? This abstract ideal, oh, the goodness, equality of everybody, right? Equality for all, liberty for all. The more I fix my eyes on that abstract principle, I will not give it heed, right? In other words, I will disregard the pain, and the result will be more catastrophic, right? It will be more catastrophic than I imagined with the French Revolution, right? You see, because the French Revolution unintentionally, right, created a monarchical and absolutist system of governance led by Napoleon. Right? It only simply replaced one form of monarchical and absolute form of governance to another, right? With another, right? It simply replaced one form of monarchy with another. Of course, this time it was led by Napoleon. Burke, of course, does not see any reason as to why he should object the right of the French people to change the incompetent and absolutist forms of government in France. But rather, for Burke, the problem with the French Revolution was the manner in which these revolutionaries went about doing things. Right? The problem, for Burke, the French Revolution was not the problem, but the problem he had with the French Revolution was the manner in which they went about bringing about these changes. Right? They went about doing these things, and what did the revolutionaries do? Right? They tore down from the roots. It replaced them. Right? It completely restructured the whole society. Right? And that abstract principles are the and because the abstract abstraction of reality, right? Whenever you try to implement these abstract principles, when whenever you try to reduce the reality into simple abstract principles, you completely, like we discussed so many times, you completely disregard the complexities of the reality, right? It completely disregards the complex reality, right? The intertwined, interdependent uh, manner in which every institution, every person is deeply connected to each other, right? The new system quickly, and that's why what happened was that whenever the French revolutionaries, uprooted and destroyed and purged and destroyed the whole old system and its institutions, they replaced the old system with a new one. But then, because the new system was based, right, was founded on these abstract ideals which disregarded the reality, that new system quickly degenerated into massacre, chaos, violence, right? And finally gave rise to a despot, right? Among this confusion, and took power, right? Napoleon, right? That's why Burke he mentions this. He says this very aptly, right? The ablest architects of ruin, of architects of ruin, of ruins. Yeah, yeah. Architects of ruin that have existed in the world, right? Pulled down to the ground. Their monarchy, their church, right? Their revenues, their army, their commerce, their arts, their nobility, their manufactures, their arts, and their law, right? In other words, literally, the revolutionaries and the revolutionaries earnestly thought that instead of establishing that by establishing such an ideal republic of liberty, equality, and fraternity, right? Instead of establishing their ideal of liberty, equality, and fraternity, The result was what? Wholesale reform that plunged France into chaos, that plunged France into violence and tyranny, right? All of which was, all of which was uh, was foreboded by Burke, right? And this is what this is where the difference lies between Burke and his contemporaries. You see, because Burke disagreed with other contemporaries with regards to French Revolution, because for him he understood better 1776 and the Glorious Revolution of 1688 was vastly different from the form of liberalism of the French Revolution, in that there was this unbridgeable gap or chasm between these revolutions. For instance, because unlike the Glorious Revolution, where reforms, the Glorious Revolution of 1688 in England, right? Unlike that, you see, because the Glorious Revolutions, in that revolution, reforms were made, right? There was, in that Glorious Revolution, you did not find a wholesale change of society, a wholesale destruction of the old institutions, right? Over there in the Glorious Revolution was not about change, but it was about reforms, right? Reforms made reforms made on existing institutions, right? The power of the monarchy after the revolution was still intact. The landed gentries were still intact, as well as the privileges of the church. The privileges were maintained, right? Unlike the French Revolution, where the monarchy was literally the power was literally cut down, aristocracy more or less removed, and the privileges of the church more or less removed, right? So it brought about the French Revolution brought about a radical change and radically restructured the whole French. And for Burke, he saw that more so than others. And thus he was saying the liberalism of the Glorious Revolution of 1688 was vastly liberalism of the French Revolution, right? Where the French revolutionaries wanted to impose strict, rational standards of natural rights, right? Equality and liberty and all that, nonsense, consideration of the real nature of the society and the real need of the human, all of which may be vastly different from which the revolutionaries were trying to impose, right? Thus, for in clairvoyance, in the sage, like the he envisaged that, you see, either from the French Revolution the society itself will not last, or if it lasts, the result, the consequences, the outcome of this revolution will be an illiberal society. Not a liberal society, but an illiberal society. That's why, in the words of Burke, he says, your revolution will have a master, right? And indeed, and indeed, their master was Napoleon, right? Napoleon was the master, the rise of Napoleon. So for Burke, the the collapse of the French Revolution, right, with the rise of Napoleon, was fueled by two related ideas, right, that ultimately fate, that ultimately, uh, um, that ultimately fate the demise of the euphoria that initially accompanied the fall of the old regime, right? The first, Burke, the first idea that really led to down was this, right? The first was the conviction, right? The first was the conviction that was more or less inspired by the ideas and works of the 19th century philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Right? It was that for Rousseau, inequality, also freedom, injustice, as well as social conflicts and jealousy, malice, hatred, envy. For Rousseau, these were the products of civilized life, or you get this only in modern society or society in general, right? So the revolutionaries uh, highly, they absolutely believed in the claims of Rousseau, right? And Rousseau also says that, you see, in a very famous dictum, he says this, and that You see, not only to society, not only to you get hatred and jealousy and the loss of freedom and inequalities because of society, but also he says, you see, all these problems, society, that human beings in a society are in chains, right? He says his famous dictum, man is born free, right? Man is born free, and yet we see him everywhere in chains, right? Man is born free, and yet everywhere he is in chains. So the revolutionaries actually believe that, right? In other words, proposing is that human nature, whether good or bad, of a social system or a society, right? And revolutionaries took to heart what Rousseau was saying. That's why convinced that the revolutionaries had come to wholeheartedly believe in Rousseau's claim that man is born free, yet everywhere in chains, right? And because they believed in it so much that they proceeded about pulling down the whole social structure, right? They destroyed the existing social institutions, but then also failed to realize that the chain which Rousseau was talking about, right? The chains, man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chains. But then for Burke, what he was saying is that these revolutionaries failed to see that the chain which Rousseau was talking about were the social bonds, right? And you can't have society if you don't have social bonds, right? Family, society, right? You can't have society if you don't have, if you destroy, if you mangle and destroy the social chain, the social bond that ties an individual with to a larger group, right? If you destroy that, you make, right, you make the individual, right, alone. You make him alienated from the society, right? You make him hopeless, you make him demoralized, right? You make him powerless, right? He was saying that, but then the revolutionaries were too foolish to know that the change bond, the social bonds were necessary to keep this, right. And so what Burke was saying was that the French Revolution needed to bring about reforms to the existing system, like the Constitution. But then, instead of going for reforms, they wholesale change in the French society, right? Quite keen to make a must have reforms. You to reform your society, but change. Now you have to be careful about when you speak of change. You must be careful because you see, for him, this is a big gulf between reform and changes, right? Or change. For Burke, it is more prudent to reform a society and its institution, right? It's more prudent to reform the society and its institutions rather than to change the whole society wholesale, right? To pull out from the roots the existing institutions. Reform is what Burke would recommend, right? Of course, whenever he says reform, he always means that okay, you have to carry out whatever reform that you're carrying out with prudence supplemented by prejudice. And of course, prejudice means what? It's not a negative term, but it's the wisdom of the ages, right? So by reform, Burke had in mind here not the wholesale transformation of the society, but in addressing and targeting, right? You must actually target and try to alleviate and resolve the problem, right? That's reform, not the wholesale. While change for Burke is a total transformation, right? It is a wholesale alteration of the society, right? A change or transformation in the very substance of the society, right? Its very nature is changed, right? For example, then you may ask, what's the difference between Gulf and sir? Then can you give us an example? Japan and South Korea, right? After the Second World War. I mean, Japan after the Second World War, South Korea after the Korean War, right? After the Second World War, Japan was totally destroyed. It was totally destroyed, and hence what we now today know as Japan is very very different. Be it in the frame of mind, right? Culturally, the kinds of institutions they have, it's very different. What they have now is the product of a wholesale transformation of Japan after the Second World War. Similarly, South Korea. what we today now know as South Korea is a product of the Korean War, right? Because the Korean War brought about a total transformation of the Korean society. Hence, whatever institutions that you have, whatever works over there, or the kinds of frame of view of the world, their way of thinking things, their way of viewing the world is all product or the consequences of the Korean War, right? So only when you have complete destruction of your society, then can you have total change. Otherwise, Burke says reforms are the best way, right? You make minor changes over here, minor changes over there, right? Because why? Because everything in every institution, in every person, we are related, right? We are interdependent with each other. So if you change here, it somehow shows the effect over here. So you change over here. So you make reforms, right? Trial and error. You do that. Not wholesale change where society is completely, utterly destroyed, like Japan after the Second World War, the French Revolution, right? The revolutionaries believing Rousseau, right, saying that because they held because they had such a high conviction about the ideas of Rousseau that they started believing, oh, because inequality, slavery, violence, and other social vices are the product of the society, right? It is the society that makes the individual or the society itself unjust. Hence, the only way they reason, right? The revolutionaries are thinking the only way to make, the only way to remove such injustice, right, is to uproot the existing order and in its place install a new system, right? Install a new system based on equality, liberty, fraternity. Of course, remember that equality, liberty, and fraternity, those are all abstract ideals. They are not concrete, right? They're not concrete. They're abstract, right? So the revolutionaries think that by uprooting the old system and installing in its place a new society based on these abstract ideals such as equality and liberty and fraternity, the result will be that everybody will become peace loving, right? They'll become equal, they'll be selfless, they'll be caring, right? But believing such an abstract proposition, these revolutionaries don't assume, right? They assume that everything will automatically just come in place, right? And the thing is, not only did not only did such an appeal, right? Uh, this sort of worldview, right? This sort of view of the world, right? Was also more or less influenced by the views of, again, another very one of the key thinkers in the Enlightenment era, right? Voltaire, right? The revolutionaries held in deep conviction the ideas of Rousseau, but also of Voltaire, right? Because for Voltaire, he supposed that if human beings and human society are the main sources of evil, right? For him, then then the transformation of the society is itself necessary and desirable, right? Voltaire was saying that because if we, the human beings and human society, are the main sources of evil, right? Then we just have to transform it. The transformation or the change of the society is not only necessary, but it is also desirable, right? And these revolutionaries actually believe that, right? They believe that, and the result of trying to implement such a thing was what? What was the outcome? The result was nothing moral about the French society after the revolution, right? After the revolution, what do we find? We find the streets of Paris, right? And its countryside. It brought instability, the whole French, which is related to the first, was that the work of Voltaire, right? Because Voltaire tended to stress the significance of reason and human progress, right? Who doesn't? Everybody does nowadays. Voltaire stressed the significance of reason and human progress together, right? And so the revolutionaries, in total influenced by Voltaire, held the conviction that the human history in a linear direction, right? That is, from superstition to reason, and from tyranny to liberty, from privilege to equality, and so forth, right? In other words, towards something better, something brighter, something harmonious, right? In a sense of a golden in the sense that they are moving. Human history always moves towards something better, right? From primitive to modern, right? From privilege to from tyranny to liberty. So for them, and again, this is the Voltaire. They thought that society always moves in a linear direction. And with such certitude about this belief, right? Revolutionaries believed that all they had to do now to realize their ideal to its fullest realization was once it is done, their ideal will fall into its own place, complex reality as to the manner in which. But the problem was this: you just do that, and then everything will fall into its own place. But then they forgot to realize that, and they forgot to think about this: is that the messy and complex realities, right? They did not think about this. After we have uprooted all the existing institutions, right, and we have restructured them, complex reality that awaits us, complex realities such as who will rule, right? How will the nation be ruled, right? How are we going to separate the powers, right? Are we going to separate the powers, or are we going to share the powers, right? What sort of be implemented, right? How about the social system, the class system that existed prior, right? That existed, and how shall we replace them, or how shall we shall we restructure the class system? What about foreign relations? How do we deal with foreign empires that surrounds us? French Revolution were viewing France in a very hostile manner, right? Because none of the neighboring empires wanted revolution simulation to take on realms. So again, how do we deal with that? Customs, right? How will the society be structured in actuality, right? How do we do that, right? All these messy complexities were all hidden away, right, by the perfect simplicity of the albums, right, with in general, right. This is the problem, because if you think about it, this is what actually happens. Some philosophers or some thinkers will talk about some ideas, right, about how the world is, and then there will be another group of intellectuals simply no way that ordinary can ever understand the complexities of Marxism in Russia, right? You see, for instance, of course, we are digressing, but there's a point as to why I'm saying this. Unification did not care and pay much, right? Of course, it would be very difficult for average ordinary citizens to read 4 or 5 books. It's very difficult. Nobody has time to read all of that books. So what happened? So what did we have here, right? In order to make communism or Marxism or Marxism the ideas of Marx, communism oversimplified, and then he fed simplified version of communism, socialism, Marxism to its people. It simply said, he just imagine and thousands of pages of Marxism, right? He reduced thousands of pages of Marxism to one sentence. You're exploited, right? Right? And as citizens, we want simplicity. We don't want anything complex, right? Somebody talks about some ideas, and I don't have time to read how. I need something. I need somebody to tell me something, right? That's why YouTube. That's why you have YouTube. So if you have any problem, what do? You go to YouTube and you type in something, right? How the meaning of socialism or communism, and in 5 minutes, 4 minutes, you'll get the whole of communism, right? But then you're not even getting. But that's what it is. That's what Lenin did. He reduced the whole of communism catchphrases, right? You're exploited, right? You don't know you're exploited, right? So the only way is for us to rise up and revolt, right? You see, and that's what saying that all the abstract stupid and are dangerous. We're not saying an idea and then simply feeds that to the people for some political purposes or some own agendas, whatever agenda it may be, right? So that's what happens. That's what happens. What happened in Russian Revolution? That's what actually happened in French Revolution as well. We can say that you can criticize the ideas of Rousseau and Voltaire, but then you must also the revolutionaries oversimplified the ideas of Voltaire, and so it's not easy to understand them, right? And so the only way to understand Rousseau is to simplify it, right? The only way to understand the ideas of Voltaire is to oversimplify it, right? So that's what it is. Um, so all these things, right? So what Burke was trying to convey, right, was that society and its existing institutions and systems, as well as the many problems that plagues the society, cannot be understood, nor should they be taken in an ahistorical sense, right? Everything for Burke, everything is intricately connected, and this is echoing the ideas of everything is intricately connected to each other, right? Where a simple change here will invariably necessitate, right? The existing societies, the existing law and institutions of society, Berg is saying, are organically, they grow organically out of the particular society's history and social experiences, right? Predicated, dependent on, which are predicated on or predicated or are the consequences of the society in the lengthy periods of history, right? And thus they embody practical wisdom, right? These experiences, right? They embody a great deal of practical wisdom, which should not be, which should not be easily discarded or written off under traditional and hence narrow and outdated, right? Burke is keen to show that what is dismissed as superstition, right? What we dismiss as superstition, um, when we what is this piece of superstition, right, based on blind adherence to traditions, right? This sort of experiences, right, the wisdom of the ages, right, they give us they provide us a sensible wisdom in exercising prudence in judgments, and also they guide us in the face of pretentious certitude, which the abstract ideals, which any person, which anyone who tries to bring about changes in a society would necessarily say, right? If you meet anyone, right, it's very right. What do? They say, oh, everything must change, right? But the question is, do we need to change everything? I'm sure, and if you actually think about it, for instance, all the existing social institutions that we have, Nagaland, right? Wherever, Nagaland, Manipur, Assam, or Arunachal, wherever, there may be imperfection, there may be flaws in institutions, but you also have to admit, right? And if you actually think about it, you also have to admit that not every institutions, not everything about the existing social institutions or forms or traditions or customs are wrong or are bad or are destructive. Some of them are very useful, right? They play a good they have a function to play in the society, in keeping the society together, right? They play that role. And so by saying that we have to remove everything, that means you're also going to remove what you are currently enjoying. Say for instance, if you currently enjoy some sort of, say for instance, privilege, right? Well, of course, when I say privilege, I don't mean in a like selfish manner, but then when I say privilege, you enjoy some culture of your own, right? And when somebody says, oh, we have to change, right, we have to change our society, that means, and if you say yes to that without ever saying that we need to keep what is best and remove what is not good, instead of saying that, you're going to say yes to everything, to change everything, even those privileges which you're now enjoying, right? You cannot say that. And this is the problem with people in Nagaland, I think. Whenever it comes to change, right, we are too and we just park at things, right? Just like, we just like parking. We don't like doing anything, just park. So for instance, if people think that traditional customs are the, say for instance, uh, emotional, intellectual, then physical, then society, right? And if we say that the traditional customs are hampering our development. We must then we simply don't mean that we have to change everything about the society. No, because everything that exists right now, they exist because they whenever they were first established, they served some function, right? Some functions, right? They serve some functions. And to say that we have to remove everything, that means you're going to remove everything, and then what, right? Then what? How is the society going to survive? How is the society ever going to function properly, right? So what Burke is saying is that instead of changing everything, you take one institution, right? You see what is good with it, you keep what is good, and change what is not good. Not change, reform what is not good, right? Same thing. If something is wrong over here, you see what is good, right? You take that, you preserve that, and then you reform what is not good. That's how it should be, is what Burke is saying. And of course, when we say that, when we say people tend to misunderstand that, right? Whenever we say we must reform that, they think that it's change. No, it's not change, it's just reform. And then if you say we are for reform, preserve what is best and change what is hampering us emotionally, right? That's what Burke was trying to say. Right? So the whole idea behind what he's saying with the French Revolution and the abstract ideals and the change and reforms is that simply that. He's saying, first of all, be realistic, right? Be realistic. There's no need for you to right, the validity of an abstract ideal. Even if you believe it, that's fine, but don't ever try to impose the abstraction of your ideas to reality, because whenever you try to do that, the consequences will not be good. Secondly, it will not work, right? It will not work. That's why there are many people, right? This is the, for example, and we'll end with this for today's lecture. We'll end with this. People say that for instance, there was this one thing going on a few years back, right? Some people in internet, they like to hide behind internet, right? They like, so they say there's one forum. I do not know what kind of forum it was, but they say that Nagaland will be heaven on earth if A, B, C, and D, right? Right? If people change like this or like that, then Nagaland. But the thing is, no, it will not be. The person, I forgot his name, but then the person who said that was kind of, I can understand that he's quite naive. He's quite uh, unrealistic in so many ways. And then saying as heaven on earth, Nagaland will never be heaven, right? It will never be. No place on world, no society in the world will ever be heaven on earth. No society. That is it, right? So whenever it's a wrong idea, it shows that you don't really understand what is going on in the society, right? That you really have to think a lot about what you say properly, right? Just because you are young, right? New generation, young youth generation, doesn't mean that whatever you say is true. Whatever you say is right or prudent, right? In fact, many of what you say may be foolish, like foolish things such as Nagaland will be heaven on earth. No, it will never be heaven on earth. It will just be a society, right? So whoever it is, if you're watching, then you know what to do, right? So no, that's abstract ideas. Whenever you try to impose that, and then imagine if people are so gullible and then they believe that, oh yeah, Nagaland will be heaven or if we only do this, if you only remove all these things. But no, it will not be. For instance, you may say Nagaland will be heaven on earth. Nagaland will be heaven on earth if there's no tribalism or no corruption, right? And then you believe it. Oh, right, that's right. Nagaland will be heaven on earth if we just remove tribalism and just remove corruption. And then you and your lackeys, right, your chamjas, right, and your friends, right, you all come together. You drastically remove everything that exists in the society here in Nagaland, right? You remove everything, right? All the institutions, everything, customs, tradition, corruption, and tribalism, right? But then, but then, what is left then if you remove? If you remove tribalism, then who are you? If you remove corruption, then do you think that there will be no corruption even when you impose a new system? You see, that is the thing. Even in the French Revolution, they wanted to remove corruption from France, right? Hence, revolution took place, and the Jacobin, led by Robespierre, he wanted to make sure that in the new republic, there will be no corruption, right? So what did he do? He killed, right? He killed, he punished, he even killed his own friend, right? He even killed his own best friend who took money from others, right? Just imagine, for the sake of, for, just imagine, so that there will be no corruption at all. This is what you become, right? You end up killing everybody, right? You end up in bloodshed. You end up in massacre, right? You end up becoming a tyrant, just so that you can bring to reality your idea and your ideal. Oh, there will be no more corruption. Ah, but there's corruption. Corruption is a reality. It's not. It will happen. Corruption will always be there. Then what? What are you going to do? Kill everybody because everybody's corrupt, right? And you may say, oh, there should be no tribalism. Then if tribe is removed, then who are you, right? Of course, tribes, but then they're, I'm just trying to give you an idea, right? Who are you? Well, if you remove tribalism, right, then become then you become more isolated, then more alienated, right? And you before that, of course, you may say, oh, I mean, tribalism is not the. You may have a, you may find a new identity which is more than that, but then, but just for within the context of Nagaland, then what, right? Just removing tribalism will not change everything. Will not change corruption. Corruption will be there. Even if you take care of corruption, you cannot deal with corruption if you don't deal with tribalism either, right? Same thing. Like I said, and like Burke was saying, everything is interconnected. In order to deal with corruption, you have to also deal with tribalism, right? They're not separate entities. They are connected to each other. So likewise, it is a society will only be a society. You can never have a good society. You can never have a, well, what kind of changes you're talking about, because change, what kind of change, no matter what kind of change, it's not an easy matter. It's not child's play. It's not a cup of cake. It's different. It's real. It has a huge impact on real lives. In the real, you have to be careful, right? Okay, so we'll end here for today. We'll end the lecture on Edmund Burke. All right.